I'm going to give a brief summary of how this book evolved, and then just give a few examples of some of the quilts that are in this book. I'm not going to show a picture of all 115 barn quilts. That'll take forever. And besides, if I did that, you wouldn't have any incentive for buying the book. So, my story begins roughly 60 years ago in West Virginia, in the Appalachian Hills of West Virginia. There's a girl living there by the name of Donna Sue Groves, and her grandmother also lived in West Virginia. And one day, Donna went to visit her grandmother. It was a nice fall day, the leaves were falling, and her grandmother told her to go out into the backyard underneath that great big maple tree and bring me your 3 favorite leaves. Well, I can imagine that's quite a task to go out underneath a tree, the thousands of leaves on the ground, and find 3 favorite leaves. But she did. She brought 3 favorite leaves to her grandmother and asked, "Grandma, what are you going to do with these leaves?" And Grandma said, "Well, you're just going to have to wait and see." And she kept on pestering her grandmother, "What are you going to do with these leaves?" And her grandmother said, "Well, you're just going to have to wait and see what I'm going to do with them." So the time went by, weeks rolled by, and Donna Sue visited her grandmother again about a year later, and her grandmother said, "Come, show you. I want to show you something." And what she had done was use those 3 leaves as a pattern for making a beautiful quilt for her granddaughter. And that really struck home to that young gal. And she later moved to Ohio with her mother and got to thinking back to how that relationship between the leaves and the quilt and the grandmother. And she said, "I'm going to start a barn quilt trail," consisting of barn quilts showing some reflection of somebody's memory or emotion or something like that. And if you've ever made a barn or a cloth quilt, or if you're in the process of doing a cloth quilt, you'll probably realize that there's a lot of emotions in making quilts. They can be sad, they can be happy, they can be goofy, who knows what. But I think everybody who makes a quilt has some idea in mind what that fabric is supposed to say to them. It could be the color, it could be the design, but it says something to that person. And I got to thinking about that, and about a year and a half ago, I got to wondering, there's over 100 barn quilts in Stevens County. There must be quite a few stories out there. And you don't know the stories just by driving by and looking at that barn quilt. You have to know the story behind it to really appreciate what people put into making these. So about April, I told my wife, I'm going to publish a book on the barn quilts. And her reaction was this. Well, maybe it wasn't. Bill, what am I doing wrong? There. That was her reaction. Well, I figured what could go wrong? All you have to do is take a bunch of pictures, arrange them on a piece of paper, send it into a printer, and get it published, and you're all done. Well, had I known now what I knew then, or the other way around, if I'd known then what I know now, I probably would not have gone into this project, because it really turned out to be a lot more than I wanted it to be. The first thing I learned was that, that I needed help. Next one. The old camera that I was using, I had taken pictures of all these barn quilts ahead of time, and I thought that would save a lot of time, but it turns out that my old camera wasn't taking pictures that are sharp enough. They have to be in good focus and be able to be enlarged. Otherwise, the publisher is not going to publish that picture. So I enlisted the help of my grandson with his fancy camera. And Isaac, I would like to have you stand so people know who you are. This is the guy that went around and took all the pictures. We started doing this in May, and our goal was to be done by June so that we could send this in to the publisher and have the book ready by Thanksgiving time. Well, go ahead. We ran into some scheduling problems. Quite a few days of rain in May, That always screwed up my schedule. People going on vacation or getting sick or having to golf or whatever. A lot of things interfered with my schedule, and people wouldn't return my phone calls or answer my emails. It got quite frustrating. And when I vented my frustrations to my wife, this was her reaction. But being a stubborn Dutchman, I wasn't going to give up. So we kept on taking pictures, and I think, Isaac, we probably finished the last one in September. It was late anyway. It was late. So we missed our November deadline. But now it came time to arrange the pictures. And I put a picture of a barn quilt against a white sheet of paper, and it didn't look all that attractive. And since we're talking about barns and wood, I thought it'd be nice to put those pictures with some wood in the background. So we put that same picture in a background of wood that was acceptable. In fact, I think that looks kind of nice. So I sent Isaac around taking close-up pictures of barn wood. I don't think he went on anybody's private property, but did you? Okay. Okay. Just going around our place taking pictures of old barn wood. And the next thing, and the most important thing, go ahead, was to edit it and lay out and design and all that type of stuff. And I want to acknowledge my daughter, Isaac's mother, Carla Overland. Would you stand, please? She was the brains behind how to put this book together and how to work with a publisher, because I had no experience in doing that. The content of this book starts out with how the barn quilt trail developed in Stevens County. And I tried to give credit to all the people who were involved at different times. And then I go into a section on discussing the individual barn quilts and a little bit about the owners. And then a section on the National Park barn quilts, which are out at the Pomme de Terre campground in Morris. And then there's a few barn quilts that are not on the trail for various reasons. Maybe their place is too far off a public highway and they can't see it. But nevertheless, they're important barn quilts, so I put those in. And then there's a map and an index at the end of the book. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm dedicating this book to the memory of Joni Murphy. Craig's husband is here. She passed away last September. And she was one of the very supportive people right from the get-go, several years ago when I started this idea of having a barn quilt trail. She came forward as one of the people who helped me get it organized. So what I want to do next is just highlight a few of the barn quilts. Again, not all of them, but to give you some idea of the diversity of these barn, what people were thinking when they made them. Go ahead. That may seem to you like a just ordinary quilt pattern from a cloth quilt, but in fact, it's patterned after frosting on top of a cake of Karen DeVita's birthday, his sister's birthday. So that's an unusual idea to put onto a barn quilt. And next picture shows Karen and her husband Joe at their farm. And then we'll skip to Chicago, in Chicago. Maria Marty was having a tough time deciding what design to put on her barn quilt. She narrowed it down to these 4 different block designs, and she couldn't decide which one to do, so she put them all together in the one barn quilt, and she titled it Undecided. Next one. Pat Hine, who lives in Morris, made this beautiful quilt in honor of her grandson Abram, and then she had a barn quilt made, mounted on the front of her house using that same pattern. So just driving by, you don't realize these things, but when you know the story behind it, you realize there's a personal story behind that particular barn quilt. Next one. Sunbonnet Sue is at the home of Vicki Dosdall, just north of Morris. And according to one source, Sunbonnet Sue is the 8th most common quilt block design in the U.S. I didn't know that. I thought there'd be some other design that was quite popular, but the 8th most popular one. Next one. And Vicki dedicated this barn quilt to the memory of her mother, Flossie, who you probably know managed the 4-H food stand at the county fairground for many years. And that tradition still goes on in the family. Vicki, would you stand and be acknowledged? Okay, another common quilt design is called twisted tiles. And it's just two squares that are intermingled and twisted together, and they call it twisted tiles. Next one. And twisted tile barn quilt is at the home of Randy Hancock, just east of Hancock, Randy Luthi. And the intertangled squares remind him of little metal puzzle pieces. I don't know if you played with those when you were a kid, but he used to play with those a lot. They're little tiny things all twisted together. And the goal was to try to untwist them and get them apart. And he did a lot of that as a small kid. And he wound up going to South Dakota State University and get an engineering degree. And the colors on his barn quilt are the colors of South Dakota State University. Again, you probably wouldn't know that just by driving by. Next one. Julia Dobbs, professor of art history at the university, teaches a class called Art plus History, University plus Community. And it's a way of involving freshmen coming to the university here in Morris to introduce them to the Morris community and what's going on in Stevens County. And part of that class requirement is to do research on barn quilts and then design a barn quilt and make that barn quilt and donate it to some organization. There are currently 3 of these on the old seed house on the campus at the university, and those 3 barn quilts illustrate the 3 different eras of the university. The first one being the American Indian boarding school, the second one being the School of Ag, and then the third one, the current one, the Liberal Arts College. Julia, I'd like to have you stand and be acknowledged because that was quite a project. Yeah, her shirt shows the 3 that are on the seed house on the north end of campus. It's a big white building. And the 3 that her class did this year, one of them was made for the Stevens County Historical Society, and that's going to be mounted in front of the one-room schoolhouse on the fairgrounds, probably this spring. One was donated to the Morris Public Library, and that is on the gazebo in front of the library. And then the third one was given to the Stevens County DAC. And I want to spend a little time talking about that one because that particular barn quilt, the team of students that designed and painted that went into a lot of effort to identify every little individual element in that barn quilt and give a meaning to it. Next one. Next one. They again used the twisted tile pattern. And that shows the inner relationship between the people who work there and the people who dwell there and the intermingling between the people with different disabilities. Next one. And they go on to identify what each of the different colors represent. The green represents the sensory disabilities, red, the physical disabilities, the white, the invisible disabilities, yellow, the cognitive disabilities, blue, the mental disabilities, and the black, people who have lost their lives to some disability. And then the maroon border around it kind of matches the color of the building itself. And I think that was just really a supreme effort by that group of students to put a lot of meaning into that particular barn quilt. I'm going to mention just one other barn quilt. And I'm really proud of this, and not because I painted it, next slide, but because of the title and what the concept that's in that barn quilt. Next slide. At the bottom of that barn quilt, circled in yellow, there's an element that represents the mother, or my wife. Next slide. Who gave birth to 3 daughters. Excuse me. All 3 of them are involved in professional occupations relating to fabrics and quilting. I'm really proud of them. Sorry. Okay, I'll finish up with one more slide. I want to emphasize that all the labor that went into making this barn quilt book was donated. Isaac's time, my daughter's time, my time, it's all donated, so all the profits from the sale of this book go directly to the Historical Society. And the book is also available on Amazon, and any sales from Amazon, the museum will get a small royalty from them. So thank you for your attention. Sorry I let my emotions get the best of me, but that happens.